Many of you know that I've been working on a J fashion series where I showcase various different styles and talk about their origins and their history. And a little bit ago I covered a timeline of pastel J fashion where I talked about yume kawaii, yami kawaii, and menhera. And I kind of oversimplified a few things. And I have since better educated myself, so today we're going to talk about a increasingly popular substyle called menhera. Before we really get into menhera and what it looks like, we kind of have to address the current popular pastel fashion in Harajuku, which is largely yume kawaii. Yume kawaii is a very general term. It means cute like a dream, basically. And again, it really just describes what is popular at the moment, the contemporary pastel fashion of Harajuku. Popular brands include WC, Listen Flavor, WeGo, you know, just that very streetwear influenced style that's popular in Harajuku right now. Yami kawaii is what happens when you take that yume kawaii style and add darker elements to it. It's very similar to Western pastel goth or creepy cute, and it does occasionally contain medical themes. Yami kawaii is generally an accepted term, we'll get into that, because it is sort of an umbrella term that various types of darker motifs can fit under. In the West, we often see menhera as being a substyle of yami kawaii, but this is not actually correct. And a lot of people in the menhera community especially prefer to have them identified as two completely separate things and categorized as two completely different styles. So what is menhera and what makes it different? The term menhera is actually a slang term that's used to describe people with mental health issues. It roughly translates to something along the lines of mental healther. And since it is slang, it does have a lot of negative connotations, especially in Japan. It is because of this that the fashion style is only called menhera and never menhera K. K doesn't really refer as much to fashion as it does a group of individuals, so adding that suffix to the word is very othering to those with mental health issues, which is why when we talk about menhera fashion, we don't add that K suffix to it at all. It just increases that negative connotation. Sort of like how you would call a rainbow outfit a pride outfit and not necessarily a gay outfit. Since the origin of the word is an insult, it can still be turned into an insult quite easily. So this slang term for people with mental health issues, menhera, was adapted and reclaimed by members of a 2chan board in Japan. This is where the style first debuted. On this particular 2chan board, long before the days of 4chan, on this 2chan board, members would talk about their experiences, find community, and post vent art. It's important when talking about these issues to remember that Japan has a scary high suicide rate, paired with basically no positive mental health communities. Therapy and medication has not been embraced in Japan in the same way that it has been in the West. And I mean, we still have mental health stigma here. Eventually, what started on this 2chan board created a whole community of vent art. And this is where the menhera style originates from. Menhera is a fashion style, but it was originally an art style. And the art is still a very heavy focus of the style today. In fact, if anything, it's probably art first, before fashion. Most menhera fashion is purposefully kept simple. It is supposed to look like something that a person with a chronic illness could feel comfortable in. Most outfits consist of some sort of big oversized top with some sort of vent art on it, paired with a loose, comfortable bottom of some sort. Often this can be a leggings and skirt situation, or a leggings and shorts situation, or just a straight up leggings situation, and paired with flat, casual shoes. No heels. Never heels. You will never see heels in menhera. It's just not a thing. Really, any color scheme is accepted, but the most common colors are pastels, usually, but also black and white outfits are very common, and occasionally you will see red details. And while I note red details, I do want to specifically mention that gore is not a motif that is common in menhera art. Even seeing blood in general is quite uncommon, as most menhera artists prefer to use metaphors for blood and gore. A very big part of this is because visible blood can be a self-harm trigger for many individuals with certain mental health issues. And since this is a mental health, wellness, and acceptance community, purposefully triggering people with self-harm tendencies probably not very acceptable. The fashion is supposed to be a coping mechanism used to avoid self-harm. It is not imagery that is meant to trigger self-harm. And that is the function of Menhera style. Vent art gives people the opportunity to turn their dark, destructive thoughts into something potentially even beautiful in its own way. And wearing that vent art on a shirt takes those dark thoughts, which are usually meant to be considered private, into a public statement. Menhera fashion is often meant to forcefully create this public dialogue about mental health issues. These are issues that have largely been ignored by Japanese society. So putting it directly on a shirt makes it pretty hard to turn a blind eye to it. But of course, anytime something good happens to sick people, something bad also happens to sick people. There are many who would argue that Menhera glorifies mental illness, which is a fair statement to make, and that selling shirts that say things like "I want to die" on them is profiting off of an obviously very vulnerable group of people. Mentally ill people are constantly exploited left and right to the point where we often can't even really recognize what is exploitation anymore. And honestly, both sides of this argument have valid points. I feel like most of the Menhera fashion, the original Menhera fashion, was DIY, and a lot of it now is still primarily DIY, but there certainly are a lot of Menhera brands that have popped up, and when you start selling things, I do think that there is a fine line that needs to be respected.
That's not to say that there aren't good Menhera brands that respect and empower their customers. But there is a fine line between empowerment and exploitation, and it is fair to be critical of brands selling mental health merchandise.
So let's get into some of the controversies and misinformation surrounding this fashion. Because as a community, there is a lot of misinformation surrounding Menhera. Obviously, there's all that conflation with yami kawaii, but there's also a lot of confusion with guro kawaii. The issue is that a Menhera outfit is pretty much always going to fit under the definition of yami kawaii, just based on principle. I mean, there are some exceptions. If a Menhera outfit doesn't fit the pastel color scheme of a yami kawaii outfit, that's one thing. But normally, more often than not, they are pretty similar looking. However, a yami kawaii outfit is not Menhera by default. Menhera specifically has that underlying mental health activism behind it. Because despite what we've come to see it as in the West, Menhera is not necessarily a generic kawaii style with a medical motif, but rather a style born out of this mental health advocacy. So by definition, yami kawaii cannot inherently be Menhera. Another common misconception is the origin of the name, and this is where we get into one of the biggest controversies surrounding the Menhera community. Many people, especially here in the West, believe that the name came from the Menhera-chan comic series, but the Menhera-chan comics were named after the community, not the other way around. The artist who created the most well-known Menhera-chan comic, because there is actually multiple different mangas based around characters named Menhera-chan, is Zakir Zuko, and he has a fair bit of controversy surrounding himself. He is no longer particularly well respected in the community, either the yami kawaii or the Menhera community, especially after he filed multiple copyright claims against small artists who were using the term yami kawaii in their art, which is kind of a dick move, even if he is largely responsible for setting trends in the style. A lot of people also believe that his Menhera-chan comic especially, in particular, glorifies mental illness, which I honestly kind of agree with. So his Menhera-chan is obviously somebody who is suffering with a self-harm addiction. I think the fact that self-harm is so prevalently featured in his comic is the reason it gets so commonly associated with the Menhera community, even though the Menhera community at large is meant to embrace all mental illnesses and all chronic illnesses. It's not just about the self-destructive ones. Izaki Bisuko's Menhera-chan is a magical girl series in which the characters transform through cutting themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a huge supporter of vent art. In fact, pretty much all of my zines and art can be considered vent art. However, personally, the way I see Bisuko's Menhera-chan is just, I'm sorry, it's just in poor taste. Most Menhera-style characters are cute despite their illness. But Menhera-chan is not cute despite her illness. She is cute because of her illness. In the comic, it is the thing that turns her into a magical girl. And I can't think of any better way to glorify something. When you're turning the illness itself into the cute thing, that is glorification. That is glamorization. That is just morally wrong. Especially when you consider that self-harm is basically an addiction. I mean, if Menhera-chan was shooting up glittery heroin, would we treat her the same way? Izaki Bisuko's Menhera-chan is actually one of the reasons why people in the Menhera community want to rename the style Menheru instead, as a way of distancing themselves from that mess. In conclusion, Menhera is a very simple J-fashion style that was created out of a greater community of mental health advocacy in Japan. It should not be conflated with other styles or confused for being something that it isn't. I had a lot of help making this video because I really don't consider myself to be a member of the Menhera community, although I definitely have a lot of respect for it now that I know more about it. But I want to give a special thank you to Pubethel for pointing me in the direction of a lot of really good resources. Their information was definitely incredibly helpful for putting my script together, and I will be leaving some more actually good Menhera resources down in the description for anybody who wants to educate themselves a little bit more on the style itself. In terms of what comprises the style, what would be the rules of the fashion, there really aren't any. Again, it's really just mostly tied to a community of mental health advocates as opposed to being its own separate way of dressing. I think this is part of why it's so easily confused with other fashions, because it does kind of have to borrow from those fashions since it doesn't really have any key design elements of its own that define it other than mental health advocacy. Take a shot every time I say the words mental health in this video. Except don't. Maybe don't do that. Just take care of yourselves, guys. That is really all I have to say in this video. I hope everybody has a good day, and I will see you all next time. Bye!